Um, well, they've had several decades. You know, the woke. I mean, you've got Derrick Bell at Harvard in what, the 80s, 70s, 80s? So he's the one, you know, who originated most of the. Yeah, he was at Harvard in the 70s and 80s. He originated most of the ideas behind critical race theory, which Kimberlé Crenshaw then turned into an ideology, into intersectionality, and she coined critical race theory. Her paper, Mapping the Margins, where she invented intersectionality, which James Lindsay calls the one ring of wokeness or whatever, that where um, she fused postmodernism with critical theory.
Hmm.
And that was in 1991. That was 30 years ago. So these people have been working on this project for like 40 years.
Yeah,
So they have a head start.
they do. And I sometimes wonder if it has a particular, if these communities, like whether it's Diamond or yoga or Buddhist communities, have a particular vulnerability to it, because I do find something valuable in postmodernism as a way to keep my consciousness loose. Like this idea that I can float anything into relativity allows me to relax into my own being and consciousness. Um, and because there's such an emphasis on that, like what we might call pre-epistemology in so many of these communities, I wonder if that makes them extra vulnerable to what Lindsay and Pluckrose call applied postmodernism, which is essentially like applying postmodernism to a particular uh, activism or pet theory, like in this case around centering identity. Um, I wonder if it makes our communities particularly vulnerable to it because of that uh, value in postmodern thought that is perhaps uh, which is just not being contained to where it is valuable. It's being sort of brought out into the broader epistemology, which is where it starts to make a mess. I don't know if any of that made sense, but
Yeah, you're saying that there's an appreciation for postmodernism in these communities, right?
yeah. And I
You
mean,
said
and just,
pre-epistemology. What do you mean by that?
well, if epistemology is exploring what makes valid knowledge, um, there's some kind of experience before that, some kind of state we're in, some kind of experience that we're having, as well as some narrative we're spinning, some sort of interpretation uh, of our experience and our state. So I do, I do find just in my own life that the sort of, for lack of a better term, postmodern mindset just around I can make anything relative, like gravity, right? I can decide gravity is relative. And when I explore that state, um, there's a way in which I can say, okay, I experience gravity in this way because I'm a human being, because, my consciousness is locked into this system of having two arms, two legs, existing in time, space, that in a way invites me into um, a state of letting go of that, that puts me into a more fundamental state of being where I can sense that a place where I'm free of something like gravity that seems so absolute. in my day-to-day existence.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So that's great for having a kind of state experience of what it is in being, but or what we might kind of call like ontology metaphysics, but it's not great for making sense of things. Like, I mean, the classic argument is like, okay, if you think gravity is relative, go walk out the third floor.
Yeah, go jump off a bridge.
So, yeah, it has me curious about, is there a particular vulnerability in our communities because of the fact that we put such an emphasis on these like that's a hard word to say, pre-epistemological states and experiences yeah.
You think that's the vulnerability that's what makes us vulnerable to the woke?
Is my working hypothesis. Though I have to say, one thing that does surprise me is this fusion between experience and interpretation. That's the whole lived experience thing.
Yeah, which Stephen...
It seems like we shouldn't be vulnerable to that, but we are somehow.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the diamond approach, there's a valuing of your personal experience. But we also seem to know that your personal experience, your interpretation of your personal experience can be colored by your history. And that's kind of the work, to become free from your personal history. But this lived experience thing is really interesting. Stephen always reminds me that it's subjectively interpreted personal or lived experience, subjectively interpreted experience, or perceived experience, something like that. So, and because it's such a sensitive topic, I think we give people the benefit of the doubt. Like they say, they have an experience of racism, and there are plenty of tone-deaf white people out there, right? Who are just probably like, oh, I'm sure it's not that bad, or something like that. Maybe it's not. You know, maybe that's the anti-fragility coming through. But, you know, if you haven't experienced racism your whole life, it's easy to say, you know, it's easy to encourage someone to not be fragile about it. I don't know, man. I mean, here I am getting all green again about it. And that's one of the things that makes this hard, is like, I can listen to their stories and I'm like, fuck. You know, like one person tells a story about her, I don't know, her cousin or something, or getting shot by cops, or, you know, and it's like, that's legit. And yet it's being used to Trojan horse this whole thing in, right? It's like they've got these beautiful, touching, lived experiences. That's the beautiful horse. And then we let it in, and then all the little woke ninjas pour out of the belly of the thing. Then we've got all this like critical theory and all this like postmodernism and Foucault and the episteme and all this shit, and nobody even knows what's going on. Nobody. So, I think part of our vulnerability is just we're sensitive. We're sensitive to the lived experiences. We have this legacy of anti-racism, right? We value the civil rights movement. We value the abolition of slavery, and we confronted racism in World War II, and so, and that's something that sort of came up for me in Earpy's when we were dealing with the Propertarian incursion. I was talking to Geroid, and he was encouraging me to sort of reclaim my ethnocentrism, right? My blue/amber. Because I guess in his view, he had leapt over it. Is that the right word? Leapt?
Yeah, I think he said that.
Leaped?
His view was that he had skipped something about amber, and so he thought that you were too. Is that what you're saying?
Well, right. And you know what? I looked at it, and I guess he assumed that I was going to basically like reconnect with my Judaism or something, Jewishness. And instead, what I found was that when I did that, I was more of like a patriotic American. And then so with the whole Propertarian thing, I'm wanting to be open. I'm wanting to be inclusive, and that's kind of the liberal tradition. So I was just like, yeah, sure, let's unfold this thing. Let's attempt to. But then as soon as I did the amber regression, so to speak, it's like the morality became crystal clear. It's like, wait, no. This is my heritage. Like, my country has this entire history of confronting these sort of racist ideologies. So it became crystal clear. I have to oppose this. Which I don't think is what he expected. But so we have that history, and we want to and that's what they capitalize on. That's what wokeness capitalizes on. That's why its weapons are all, you're a racist. It's like the most shameful thing you could call someone in America these days is a racist. I mean, what's worse than that?
Yeah, it occurs to me that there's a way. It's almost challenging us, I think, to reflect on our own internal amber layer, in that what it is confronting is this sense of honor around our identity. Like, so being called a racist is the worst thing because that's a type of identity marker that could be thrown at us that doesn't fit what's in that amber layer. And so without being able to go to a higher layer, we just have to combat it, right? Like, no, I'm not a racist. Here's how I'm not a racist. Or I'm not a sexist. Here's how I'm not a sexist.
That's proof you're a racist.
And yeah, I mean, you're stuck on the treadmill without being able to go to the higher layers. And so yeah, it's interesting to me. It does occur to me as a test of how attached are we to our own internal persona, our own internal sense of what our role is, what our labels are compared to other people. And because I think it's with as good as things have been over the last number of decades, it's very easy to have gotten a little bit lazy on how we're contending with our own contents of consciousness. feeling like we constantly don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to reevaluate elements. It makes it easy just to relax back into that amber place, which is why I think so much of the woke crowd is really just kind of relaxing back into that amber layer. It's the green content, just chilling out back at amber and not needing to use those hard, difficult tools of consciousness that expend energy. They're higher than that.
Yeah, dude, that's too much work.
It is.
Just relax into the moral and epistemic certainty of amber. It's so nice. I mean, that's what happened for me in Earpy's. I was just like, fuck. It was like an end to the constant, well, should I, like, how do I unfold this and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, nah, get the fuck out of here. So there's something to say for that. The amber move. It's more relaxing in a way. It's easier.
If everyone around you has the same, has more or less the same content, it's very stabilizing.
Yeah. And this was, I remember talking to Steve McIntosh when I visited him in Boulder. And he was just he just sort of pointed something out to me that I forgot. And he said, basically the spiral dynamic stuff, that's lower left. It's like what you participate in. Which of course is on the one hand, it's so obvious, but I think we get to talking about it as if it's an individual thing. A lot of people are like, oh, he's amber or she's red or something. But it's more like, you got some of these individuals who I won't name, but they've begun to participate in regressive movements or regressed movements, or it's regressed for them. This kind of these red amber cultures that have emerged from this like neo-tribalism. And is it accurate to say that person regressed? Like they're no longer capable of more advanced cognition? I don't think so. I think they're just participating in something. It's like they see the goodies. They see the benefits. It's like, oh, I can be special. I can belong, right? They're getting those like low-level belonging needs met. And they get to be, on social media, they get to be these authorities. They get the likes. They get 100 likes on a stupid, anti-vax post or something, and just low-level crap.
Well,
so they get to be that like red power god, right, in their community. All these movement, all like the social media, it like rewards people for regressing or participating in regressive movements. So yeah, so I don't know, man. It's the need for belonging, it's the need to be special, the need to feel valued. These people are finding their value in external movements. They're getting their value from other people. They're getting their value from likes, for fuck's sake. I mean, I decided a long time ago I wasn't... I was going to write the kinds of comments and posts that even people that agree with me would be afraid to like, publicly. Because I don't care about, I don't care about the likes. I just want to speak the truth as much as I can, my truth. And so for years I had people messaging me privately and saying, that was a great comment, but I didn't want to like it. Because people, I guess, they're afraid of social consequences, being ostracized, so on and so forth. I mean, I started doing that early on with the woke stuff, and eventually I stopped engaging with them on social media because it wasn't worth the backlash, the charge. Inevitably, it would create a charge, and then the charge would come back at me, and then I'd have all this charge and all this muck in my system and getting slimed. It's kind of like getting slimed, Ghostbusters.
Yeah. It also just occurs to me as boring. Like the back and forth is after a few times, it just gets very predictable on what it is.
You're right.
And yeah, actually, I found one of the things I found great for my mindfulness around the likes was I have found a plugin that basically will make it so Facebook doesn't notify you of likes.
Nice.
And I found that was a great tool, because if I found myself wanting to check the post to see how many likes it was, there was no denying of my the motivation that I was sensing inside of wanting that. And so it became a very helpful mindfulness tool. And I wonder, when you're talking about these regressions, like what's the right thing to call them? I guess the way I've always thought about it, and I don't know if this is the right way to think about it, but it just seems like there's growing in a lot of ways, like the world demands of us to grow up, and it seems that it's very easy to skip over or just kind of leave behind little pieces along the way of maybe I've contended with that power thing a little bit, but not fully. Maybe I've contended with that sense of belonging or wanting to be liked. Just enough, but not fully. And in a way, it seems like we're in a pressure cooker of having to really contend with those parts that we've left behind, that we've not fully contended with it. And a story like Breaking Bad occurs to me as like a great parable of this, where it's this high school history teacher who probably contended enough with power to like be able to be a good family man and all these things. But what happens the moment that he finds this thing that, although it's hurting other people, is just gives him this rush of power, and he's like the fucking kingpin of this endeavor that he's gone into. And to me, like, that's a great story about like how we can skip over these little,
the One Ring.
Yeah, we can skip over it enough to think we've contended with it, but then when the pressure cooker comes and we're having to really contend with it, it just seems to me like reality is just bringing us back to those things we haven't contended with. And that's what I imagine is happening for the folks you're describing, where they get drawn back into these communities that do have not just a red or amber focus. Like I could see like a healthy red or amber focus, which might be something like, let's make sure we're prepared if shit hits the fan. Let's make sure we can grow our own food and all this other stuff. But actually like has a central identity in those red and amber layers. I imagine it has to be something with that. It has power, belonging, like all of those.
Yeah.
Hasn't been contended with.
Yeah. And I appreciated what you said about the Facebook plugin that hides the likes. Because it occurs to me, given our social media reality now, it occurs to me that's an important practice. Uh, like everybody, like you should raise your kids instead of just saying stay away from drugs. You should tell them stay away from likes. They're just as addictive and, they're just as harmful and they'll fucking destroy you. Like that's what I would be telling my kids. And yeah, it's like the wokeness thing or it is like an amber movement and then you have all of these sort of red, it's like the popes, the priests of the amber are like the red guys within amber. So those are the ones that are all like doing the posting and getting the hundreds of likes and whatnot, and they're obviously doing it for, I mean, they might have this moral narcissism thing that's like, oh, I'm a good person, I'm fighting the good fight or whatever, but secretly they're just relishing the power that they have, you know? And that became kind of obvious with like Black Lives Matter, and you had that the one of the founders was buying up all these homes. It's like, oh, so you're motivated by, on some level, by the acquisition of wealth. That's not exactly supportive of the cause. So I guess all these things are spirals, right? Like you can notice, like the anti-vax movement. It's a spiral, right? There are some legit orange concerns. But the bulk of the movement is lower than that. It's a lot of like mythic stuff. Even people in our community who should know better are promoting like mythic stuff, stupid memes and whatnot, and
Are you talking about just like you're getting microchipped, like that sort of thing, or?
That's one good example, yeah.
I mean, I am often impressed by the level of technology that some people seem to think that we're at.
Exactly. Like controlling the weather, and it's like, yeah, we have some ability to influence the weather, but they think we're causing hurricanes and earthquakes, and and that gets into the conspiratorial totalism that I'm just sort of categorically against. I'm a totalist about it. It's like everything that fucking happens, everything that happens gets weaved into the conspiracy theory of everything, right? It's like everything that fucking happens. Epstein, happens, and it's like, oh, that's part of the, the globalist elites or whatever. Everything, the weather, all the media is captured 100%. They all just follow their agenda. It's like the reptilian overlords here's what you're going to say today. And they think that's how the media works, and all the corporations are in on it. It's like this giant totalistic conspiracy theory. And it's so boring. It just like shuts off the brain. I mean, it's a way to deal with complexity. Again, amber, right? I don't have to think anymore. I don't have to think. I can just regress to this very simplistic us versus them, good versus evil. Here's the myths that explain everything.
It seems like there's an almost arrogance about humanity in that as well. Like that there isn't. It's as if, well, because to think that we can just control the weather or inject microchips that are going to have some kind of impact, like
it's going to find its way into your brain, or
there's a lack of humility about how complicated nature and the human body and human systems and multiple humans acting in concert or incongruousness is not really respected. So
yeah, and then
but if I were to push back and kind of look at the opposite end of the spectrum, I think, you know, what occurs to me is what you're talking about is people like really operating at the level of literal metaphor. Like, because I think if we observe like a lot of the media narratives, it's not completely off the wall to say something like the media behaves as if it has a type of audience capture. Like it's just going to blurt out whatever it is that the audience wants to hear, that its advertisers want for it. And it's probably the case in many circumstances, particularly amongst most of the people working in those organizations, that they aren't literally attempting to do that. Like that's not a particular telos or intention that they have. But there's a congruence of a lot of complex factors, of organizational habits, of the flow of where income comes from, therefore unconscious motivators are driving at, that makes it as if it is completely captured. And I wonder, it occurs to me that our language doesn't have great ways to distinguish these kinds of sentiments from each other without having to put a lot of extra words into it. Here's what I'm not saying. Here's
yeah, so you think people are taking these sort of epistemological shortcuts or something? Generalizing or...
Yeah, well, it gets difficult anytime you're talking about a large, complex system, about how it behaves. And we have to say something about how it behaves.
Yeah, there is the blue church phenomenon. People are beholden to the source of their income. There are like mainstream narratives, and they do act like gatekeepers for those narratives. I mean, Ivermectin is a good example. And before that, HCQ, I sort of watched in horror as HCQ was completely shut out of the mainstream narrative simply because Trump was promoting it. And they had developed this kind of heuristic. If Trump says it, we're against it. That really did happen. There was that corruption, as far as I can tell. And then that just, that sort of transferred over to Ivermectin. So Ivermectin's never really got like a fair hearing, so to speak, in the mainstream. But it turns out they might have been right about the HCQ thing. I mean, imagine if they took it up and they were like, hey, there's this miracle treatment, and then it ended up being completely wrong. So that kind of shows some of the merit in the gatekeeping. You know, the mainstream is very conservative. And it's not that I don't believe the whole, you know, some of these people come in with the whole like, oh, the drug companies, right? The pharmaceutical companies, they stand to make more money from the vaccine. And that's why. That's why these drugs are kept out of the mainstream. And I don't think these like journalists, you know, these prominent journalists, they're like, we could make the pharmaceutical companies more money by not talking about this, so let's not talk about it. It's like, that's not really what's happening there. It's more like they're participating in the very conservative mainstream, you know? That gatekeeps against things like lab leak theory, because they don't want to promote anything that they can't confirm. You know, they're very conservative about that. So there is this sort of like conservatism around what they will promote and won't promote. Because we've seen like disinformation spreads 10 times faster than, you know, than real information or real news, fake news. It spreads faster because it's more like outrageous, right? So there's something true about that, probably historically for humans, that fake shit is more compelling. It's more exciting. It spreads faster than real shit. And so we've established this whole like media thing of like fact checking, and, you know, organizations have their own fact checking departments and stuff like that. Where they actually devote a ton of resources to verifying like what's true here, because it's so easy to just report. It's so easy to just like repeat like a game of telephone. Just repeat something you heard, and then it distorts and becomes something else, and then someone else repeats it, and it's like the media apparatuses, they shouldn't just perpetuate something simply because it seems promising or there might be something to it, you know? It's like you could put lab leak in the same category as HCQ. It was like, here's something that people are touting. It seems like it's got legitimacy. But we don't know if it's true, right? So there does need to be, I don't know.
Yeah, I hear
it's
you.
irresponsible to just promote anything. And it's true that, you know, lab leak theory got the same treatment as HCQ, and now Ivermectin's getting the same treatment as HCQ. And, you know, the truth is we don't really know yet. And some of these people say with Ivermectin, well, it's a matter of life and death. But they also have a lot of faith in this treatment, which is, you know, I've looked at the research, and there's some promising research, and then there's some, you know, like I posted this study in the Oasis about how people needed to be put on the ventilators 5 days. People on ivermectin needed to be put on ventilators 5 days before the control. It's a small study, but, you know. And then there's the research that's fraudulent. It's like now we have to fake research in order to promote this, you know, the fact that they're faking research, it's like they're polluting the epistemic commons. So, and making it even harder to trust, which makes it even more necessary to like, okay, let's wait. It's giving me pause, you know? I don't consider myself against ivermectin or anything. And, I've been seconds away from just ordering some, because why the fuck not? But, so it's tricky, man. But it's the people who are promoting it with like absolute certainty that scare me. That's getting to be like cultish. Messianic is a good word that I heard from someone. I won't say who. Someone we know. I'm not even talking about Brett. But there is that like, hey guys, look, we're gonna save the world, right? Which you could say, oh, it's tongue in cheek, but is it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to stay, in general, I would say I try to stay pretty outside of anyone that I see not using solid epistemology. So I tend to not be as aware of some of the fringe abuse that may be going on. And I just kind of wanted to reflect on some of the things you said, because you covered a lot of ground there. One thing is like, yeah, it is kind of horrifying. I think that most of us who are remotely aware have noticed that things that are salacious, like regardless of their truth value, tend to spread a lot easier and a lot more than things that aren't. And it's and I do think there's a degree of which the media is reacting to that a lot of the narrowness and thinking that we see cluster around the media, kind of maybe what we might call the Blue Anon group, is reacting to that, is on alert against that. And I think, with something like you gave the example of HCQ with, does the media really want to report on it? It's promising. And lab leak, right? We're not sure about it. Do we really want to report on that? I mean, I think there's a legitimate argument of like, well, I mean, okay, so you're not sure about lab leak. Well, how sure are you about the zoonotical theories, which are, if you think about them, pretty out there? I mean,
which ones?
The natural origin theories.
Oh.
Which are pretty out there. And from an evolutionary standpoint, the probability that something jumps and is immediately as contagious with human beings and as dangerous as coronavirus is not impossible, but unlikely. And so, I mean, and yeah, the natural origin hypothesis, the lab leak hypothesis, neither one of those are all that confirmed at the moment. But I think you can certainly make an argument that, hey, like the one you've been promoting is not exactly.
It does have the advantage of being historically the most realistic. I mean, every pandemic that ever happened in human history was natural until maybe the last 50 years.
Yeah. And, with, HCQ, I wonder how much of it is really just that for journalists, there's just a natural human urge to move our energy in the direction of things that we think are going to have impact or sense are going to have impact. Because one of the challenges, I think, and one of the reasons that I've been very interested in this topic of these like repurposed drugs as antivirals, beyond just kind of like the general what it says about the sense making apparatus, is that we don't really have good mechanisms for things that are low profit margin but effective to be tested and make their way into mass use. Like, it's for something like the vaccine, which has novel patented technologies to it, to make its way into mass use, has pretty established mechanisms. Like, there's a patent that can be got. That patent can be leveraged for profit. Like, all the mechanisms are there to put that into use, whether the vaccine is the most awesome thing ever, which it may turn out to be, or it's terrible, which it may turn out to be, probably somewhere in between the two. But the mechanisms are there. And so for me, what I've, and this is one of the reasons I keep saying this to people, although I'm not sure how true it is anymore, that I still consider myself on the left, which is that it seems to me that so much of what we seem to be missing as a global culture is for mechanisms that go against a profit motive to be in place. And I wonder just how much journalists maybe not consciously, but sense, like, if I talk about vaccines, like, that's some shit that's going to happen. Like, whereas if I talk about HCQ, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Like, how likely is it to get a really good test to be given some kind of trial in a way that is honing in on the ways in which it will work, the ways in which it won't, that is basically testing some kind of, that's trying to falsify something that looks solid. And that's where I have been very agitated with the ivermectin conversation, is that there's a lot of these studies which are not attempting to falsify what frontline doctors have come to intuitively. Although these doctors have come to it intuitively working with patients, doesn't necessarily mean it's right, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for a broad scale. I do think study is helpful for that. But when I see these studies that are designed against what those frontline doctors are recommending.
You mean like the Oxford one?
What's that?
Like the Oxford one?
Yeah, the Oxford one. I haven't looked at that in a week. I don't know if they have.
Where you said that, I guess your criticism was that the dose wasn't adequate.
Yeah, the dose was not what the FLCCC, is that how you say it? 3 C's? Critical care. Okay, whatever. Yeah. It seems to me you'd want to match that, right? You'd want to see. I mean, it's the basic idea of let's take what people think is working in the field. Let's take that as the starting hypothesis and test that.
Right. Although the FDA says large doses of the drug are dangerous. And I remember reading some pretty severe side effects. I don't know. I don't think people are the ivermectin advocates are being honest about that as well. Am I wrong?
Well, I have on my refrigerator, I printed out from what is it, drugs.com. It's whatever the mainstream site is on pharmaceuticals, and I have all the side effects printed off on my refrigerator. I don't have them in front.
But you don't have the effects of an overdose, which is essentially what you're encouraging, right? You're complaining that the
Well, are you saying that the
Oxford study is just testing what is considered a safe dose, but not an effective dose?
Well, are you saying that the recommendations of the FLCCC are an overdose? Technically,
I think that might be the case. Do we know what's the dose you're supposed to take? How much are you taking?
how much am I taking? I take 15 micrograms every 2 weeks.
That's not a lot.
No. I mean, I think river blindness is the most common. That's what historically most of
It's supposed to
ivermectin has been
treat.
used for. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me that if we want something that has, albeit not a like controlled data set, something that has a rather large data set, that we'd want to be looking at that. So yeah, I don't know how much time we want to spend with dead air kind of looking at. Well, actually, interestingly, okay, so I'm looking at the dosages right here for river blindness, and there's also, it looks like it has been used for some kind of intestinal tract parasites. And it doesn't seem that out of line with what's being recommended by the FLCCC. So yeah, I'm looking at medscape.com. And yeah, it's like I'm definitely under 60 kilograms. So actually it looks like it's like a little bit more than what it was for intestinal tract parasite. And then river blindness also looks like it's just a little bit more, but not much.
So, like, here's a study in the Lancet. This was from a year and a half ago. This was January 2020, where they talk about the effects on pregnancy.
Of ivermectin?
Yeah. It says so there's an absence of evidence to support clinical trials with ivermectin in pregnancy. Plausible next steps could include reproductive toxicological studies in primates. Another readily available option is an open data repository of inadvertent drug exposure during pregnancy. We estimate that given a baseline population rate of congenital anomalies of 23.9 per 1,000 births, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I would actually be I would be a little bit I would be pretty horrified right now if I was trying to build a family right now. Just I mean with between the novelness of the virus itself and the vaccine, and now you're talking about ivermectin might have some complications with pregnancy. It seems
Yeah, there's one RCT showed a non-significant effect of ivermectin exposure in pregnancy on increased rates of abortions, stillbirths, and congenital anomalies. So they call it a non-significant increase.
so an increase, but not enough to statistically verify that it's tied to. Yeah.
The study was not blinded. There's a risk of selection bias. All studies were underpowered. So, but there does seem to be some historical pregnancy or precedence for birth defects from the drug for pregnant women. Enough so that I wouldn't, if my wife was pregnant, if I had a wife, I wouldn't want her taking it.
Yeah, I think if I had a wife who was pregnant right now, I would honestly just
Take her
go.
into the
I
cave
would go
somewhere.
fucking old school and say you're locked in the house while you're pregnant. And
Yep. Regression to pre-conventional gender roles.
well, I mean that's interesting, right? Because I mean a lot of ancient gender roles really revolve around how dangerous the world was at that time and how important it was to protect women and pregnant women
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah,
Here we have a little increase in the amount of danger in our environment. It's not even remotely close to how
yeah,
dangerous the overall
exactly.
environment used to be.
Yeah, like in the Middle East, right? Women are often required to have a chaperone, and then we look down on that, in the West. But we take for granted how safe things are out there. We don't have like roaming rape gangs or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Giant packs of incels, just going around sexually assaulting women.
I mean, from everything I see, it's a very new and unique and novel circumstance that we're in, that it's not just expected that you'll have to be able to defend yourself when you go out in public. Like,
Right.
that was just the norm and throughout most of history.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting to the point we're going to have to stay strapped.
So it makes me wonder, this is another one of those tensions in the spiral, which is like, I think we would all prefer the fact that that not be a norm, that just like it's normal that you can just go out and not be ultra concerned about your own safety unless you're in a particular location. But at the same time, this has created an environment in which lots of people judge things like ancient gender roles and judge things against really without the context that we've created this incredibly safe environment, and it completely skews their worldview to the point where it puts us in danger of knocking out the pillars that have created that such a safe environment in the first place.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of libertarianism, right? Like libertarians are just the world is rather orderly and fairly safe, or it's like they take for granted the orderliness that they were just born into, and they just imagine that that's just the natural condition, right? And that it's just going to continue to be that way once we abolish all government. It's like, no, that creates a power vacuum, and then it's like the most savage win.
That's interesting because you just made me have an insight, which is, it's odd that I didn't have this insight before, which is like there's a similarity between that libertarian, like hardcore libertarian type, and like the hardcore woke type that's like just burn it all down, which is like this idea, this sort of naivete about power vacuums.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, let's just deconstruct everything. Which I guess libertarianism is a kind of a deconstructive movement. I mean, maybe modern libertarianism is really just postmodernism.
I have wondered that for different reasons, if it's sort of agentic green in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So in theory, some kind of study of history that's not just facts and things that happen, but like what I would call like empathizing with people in history and their circumstances. Something like that might be a bulwark that helps us get the best of both worlds, like the side that's like, hey, let's be nicer, let's have a better world, but also not fall into the naivete that has us knock out the pillars that have made the world like that in the first place, that gives us some kind of context.
Yeah,
In.
it seems to be the case with like every generation. You know, they're born into a certain world and then they just sort of take everything for granted, and then they just start critiquing. You know, young people think they know everything and they start just like critiquing everything. And Hegel talked about like basically our job is to look at history and see what we can find that was lost. See what we've lost by studying history. So there's this recognition that like every time a new generation comes around, and they're going to lose important things. They're going to lose the plot.
Yeah. Travel may be another bulwark.
Huh?
Field trips to Afghanistan. Let's have all these university students take field trips to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Like some of these places in the world that what it looks like when you burn everything down.
Let's send the woke to actual racist places. You know? There's been that line a lot. There's been that point made a lot lately that this is the most like non-racist nation in the world. And we're being told that it's like the most racist, unprecedentedly racist. Like, we invented racism here. It's like, wait a second. No, Western civilization is the only thing historically to come around and eliminate racism. Although that 1619 Project woman, she said it was communism, that communism eliminated racism. And yeah, you know, it's a different form of collectivism. It's like we all conform to the same ideology, but we're sort of defining it by national boundaries as opposed to by our genetics or whatever, you know, our skin color or something. It might be a higher form of collectivism, so it sort of replaces racism.
I really don't know what these folks mean when they talk about communism. If they're talking about sort of like theoretical kibbutz communism, which may work at a small scale but has a hard time scaling up, very similar to how anarchism does on the other side of the polarity, or if they're what they're talking about, because
I think they just
is he actually referring to the Soviet Union?
I think it was a reaction at Cuba or something. I think it's this notion that of replacing the race with the people or the nation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little more sophisticated. You know, it moves from like biological identity to local identity or national identity.
It's interesting that she would make a comment like that, given how much her work, Nicole Hannah-Jones, I assume you're talking about, comes back to racial identity. And, you know, what bothers me a lot about that is, of all of the inequities that there are, I'll just pick one I'll just pick one because it's one I heard about today, which is like food deserts. You know, when poor people that live in urban areas have these food deserts, and there's an impact that the nutrition has on their bodies and on their minds and on their state of being. And, you know, that and a lot of other elements that I think most of us would like to see changed. To get that change requires a much better scalpel than it's because you're black. Right? Like, how helpful is that to someone in that circumstance, or someone who's trying to do something about that circumstance, versus saying, hey, we have a food system where we have these long where there's shit, I forgot the word, like just long, everything comes from a long distance away, so you got to put all these preservatives in the food, and you got to do, and like, just talk about how the system is put together that creates these circumstance of food deserts, where people are not able to get the what their system needs, and there's legitimate negative impact of that. And without dissecting that, just saying, hey, it's because you're black and it's a fundamentally racist country, seems incredibly unhelpful and not really trying to make anything better.
And this is why the actual Marxists, they hate the woke turn, because it undermines class solidarity. You know, the class critique is more accurate. It's like, no, if you're black and you're rich, you can get all, the best food in the world. Nobody's going to stop you. If you're white and you're poor, you're going to be more prone to one of those food deserts. And the whole food thing is a fucking clusterfuck. Like, I just sort of took for granted how shitty the food supply was for so long, and just kind of ignored it. But like, the more I learn about food, the fewer options that are available. Like 99% of the grocery store just looks like poison to me.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this whole like orange thing going on, like mass produced. And, the mass production stuff has enabled more people to be alive than ever. Like, I remember reading something about how in the UK, like, the population in the UK was able to like triple once the mass production of food was possible. So we're able to feed a lot more people, which is growing the populations at an unprecedented rate. But then the mass production mechanisms are toxic. And the things that we're growing to feed people, like wheat, is also toxic. Like Monsanto, they created this drought-resistant wheat. And they're touting it like, oh, we can save the hungry, right? People starving to death in Africa. They can grow this wheat. So they will, and they are. And they're able to feed more people, and fewer people are dying of starvation. But like 30 years from now, they're going to be like, oh, the food powers are trying to poison us with with this toxic wheat and their Roundup and yada, yada, yada. So again, it's just like that, the whole spiral phenomenon where we sort of come up with one solution to solve a particular problem, and we solve that problem, but then it creates more, other problems at a new level. And now the cereal is woke.
The cereal?
Now the wheat is woke.
It is?
Yeah, haven't you seen the cereal boxes with like the rainbows and stuff? And
dude, I don't even go to that part in the grocery store.
No, I don't either. I had to find it on the internet.
Okay.
But the cereal boxes now are like pushing for equality.
Well, what more do you want from your Raisin Bran? Come on.
Like, here's an example. Kellogg's new LGBTQ cereal wants to fill your mouth with pride. So you got rainbow hearts and edible glitter and
nice.
Yeah.
I have to say the sugar fiend kid in me, it looks pretty good actually. Yeah, I mean, I think we're a part of what we're probably contending with is you're in your 30s, right? I'm in my 40s.
Late 30s, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to contend with the fact that we're no longer in that coveted 18 to 35 demographic. I mean, all this like corporate woke stuff is really just they want to speak to the coveted 18 to 35-year-olds who set their buying patterns for life. And we're the old men now.
Yeah. But I don't actually know that there's actual demand for woke cereal.
I think they're trying something. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. I don't know. But they're trying something. It's, who knows?
And then Skittles. Skittles came out with all white Skittles.
That one wonders who thought that was a great idea.
You know, they said only one rainbow matters during Pride, so they went all white. It's like they inadvertently created white Pride Skittles.
Yep.
Was the headline. So they're just trying stunts or whatever, you know.
I mean, to be fair, why not if you're a corporation? I mean, you know the American public has a short memory. It'll be a big fucking shit. The worst is it'll be a big fucking shitstorm for a week, maybe two, and then 6 months later, no one's going to remember.
Well, let's see how Gillette's stock is doing.
Well, I don't think their stock was doing well before their woke ad.
So let's see. When did that ad come out? That ad came out January 13th, 2019. So January 2019. That actually that boosted their stock. It was trading. Hold on. Who's They're not publicly traded. But you can buy Gillette stock in India. So you can buy Gillette stock in India for some reason.
Well, that's strange.
Procter and Gamble. So you can buy stock in Procter and Gamble, who owns Gillette. Gillette India engages in the manufacturing and selling of branded, packaged consumer goods in the grooming and oral care businesses. Is there some relation? I don't know. But regardless, Indian Gillette, the stock went up after... It went up about 25%. After January 2019, it's since crashed to pre-2018 levels. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I guess having a lot of people talk about it helps the stock price. But isn't there that expression like, get woke, go broke?
Yeah, there's that expression. I don't know if I buy it, but I mean, there are people that are interested in the culture war because they have a team or because they have some kind of sense of significance of culture and the difference that it makes to have a quality culture or not. But I'm not sure everybody cares about it. They're just, you know,
they just keep buying their shit, right?
Just keep buying their shit. Just don't think about it too much. And maybe to some degree that's all right.
PG&E took a $8 billion non-cash write-down of Gillette last year, 2019. It would be tempting to say that going woke, if it didn't make them go broke, certainly lost Nike and Gillette some money along the way. But it's not really that simple. Gillette will have to adapt to a world in which we shave less often and the likes of Harry's and Dollar Shave Club loom large.
Yeah, internet competition's a bitch. I was kind of interested in some things you said about food earlier, just around, talking about Monsanto and so on. The way in which a lot of reductionist thinking, like a lot of thinking that if we just, the idea that we can just look at one thing, like it's wheat, right? It's calories, it's whatever, and take that as the single factor going forward and preserve it, package it, maximize it to withstand drought, and somehow it's not going to affect a whole other host of factors that go into what has historically made human well-being. I mean, I think as integralists, that's kind of like what we're trying to guard against. And I think what has really hit me in the last few years is the degree of which I think I took for granted the capacities that a lot of our ancestors laid down in that amber layer really have a lot of wisdom in them. Like, we eat together as a family.
Yeah.
We eat these types of foods. Actually they might not have had the science to figure out why that was good, but we seem to keep coming back to scientifically discovering, like, oh shit, like there's these whole other host of factors that go back to maybe we had it sort of more right back when.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like science has brought about all this greater capacity, but there's also this hubris that has come with it that is like somehow these whatever 7 factors we can keep track of, we think like these 7 things are going to make, we're going to leverage those and that's going to make every bit of difference, and then we find out later on, oh, there's these 107 other things that we didn't know about. And then when we think we got those, then there's another 200 that we didn't know about. And and often the discoveries that we make when we fall off our hubris often come back to not exactly what traditional society was, but a lot of elements of traditional society. And I, especially in the last few years, have been gaining an appreciation for that. I think more appreciation for amber than I've had in the past.
Yeah, I think one area where that's true for me is around like the sexual marketplace. And just like how many problems the institution of marriage solved.
Mm-hmm.
And I just grew up, kind of apathetic about it, maybe a little disdainful of marriage, and it's antiquated and all that. But it's like, wow, now we're seeing what happens when all that breaks down, and we've got like OnlyFans and just like mass incel, phenomenon. And it's like the whole thing is getting fucked up. The whole sexual marketplace is getting fucked up.
Yeah, it's super weird too, because I don't know about for you, but for me, the trend was always like people are having more sex. They're they're learning about it earlier. Like there's more sexual freedom and libertineness. And now I'm seeing things like horrifying stuff, like something like 27% of men 18 to 32 or something are virgins and not by choice. And like, I mean, it's almost cliche to say something like that many men aren't getting laid is going to cause some problems. But there's a reason it's a cliche, like it's fucking true.
Yeah, a couple of problems that I can think of. Number one, I mean, if you give a man a wife and you give him some kids, he has something to live for. And then he's a valuable member of society. He's economically productive. You know, he works to take care of his family, and then he creates a stable family environment with healthy kids, right? That's the theory. Mm-hmm. Kids, you know, they're better off growing up in a family than with a single mom. But so that's one big problem. And then the other big problem is in like third world countries, you do have these like rape gangs. The incels basically get together and they're like, well, nobody can stop us if we're all together. Nobody can stop a big gang of rapists. And this goes back to hunter-gatherer days. You know, they're back in like foraging cultures. There are, maybe it's not foraging cultures. I'm not really sure, but I was just reading about sort of roving, incel gangs. Back in like the caveman days, so to speak.
Wow. I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. And like the first thing that hit me when you talked about that was like how in the West, we don't even have the epistemological tools to dissect that because we're now inundated with this meme that's like rape isn't about sex, it's about power. Right? Which would completely discredit your theory. And
well, did you ever read Sex at Dawn?
Mm-mm.
Sex at Dawn, that was about foraging cultures and how basically there was no individual, right? They didn't have a conception of the individual. It was everyone was part of the tribe. And so sex was ubiquitous. It was abundant. It was always available. You know, a woman was considered stingy if she denied someone access to their genitals. So sex and food was abundant. So they had these like nice, cushy lives. Of course, the tribe couldn't grow that much. But basically they were all polyamorous and everyone was screwing everyone else. They had this, all the foraging cultures around the world, they have this concept of partible paternity, which means one child, many fathers. When a woman wanted to conceive, she would sleep with, the tallest guy, the strongest guy, the smartest guy, the funniest guy, because she wanted her offspring to have all of those traits. They didn't realize that it was only one father. So that's sort of how we evolved in these environments of sexual abundance, where we're co-regulating each other through sex. And that's something, that Wilhelm Reich observed, that the orgasm regulated the nervous system. And so that's the way we all stayed chill as fuck. And if you look at bonobos, whenever bonobo males are fighting, the female bonobo monkeys, they will actually force sex on the men to keep them from fighting.
Smart.
So sex has always been a way to be relaxed, to relax each other, to, regulate our nervous systems. And then when we sort of left the tribe, that got all fucked up, I guess. Well, what happened after foraging cultures was red, right? Moved from purple to red. And then you got sex as a reward for pillaging, right? For invading, conquering. You got the spoils, which were the women. And that's why in Islam, you get like 72 virgins when you die. I mean, that's a way to capitalize on all the incels that are around. It's like, well, you can't get laid? Well, join our army. And you get unlimited sex in the afterlife.
Yeah. It also would seem to indicate something about the environment one is in, because I think if you are in a sexually abundant environment, however that comes about, it's 72 virgins isn't very motivating, because it's like very clear right away that is going to wear itself out. Like, it's not a sustained fulfillment.
Man, when you got nothing, it's better than nothing, man.
But yeah, I mean, I try to put myself back in like my sexually frustrated teenage years to try to like understand where a lot of this would be coming from. And man, that just sounds a rough place to be for so long.
It is rough, you know. I'm an intermittent incel. You know, I don't get laid in between times when I'm getting laid. I mean, it's frustrating for one day. Imagine going a decade.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I have a lot of compassion for these people.
Well, and going back to that statistic around 18 to 30, I think it was 32, I don't remember, but for that to be the case in your 20s, when your hormones are a lot more intense, and that you're not getting laid because you've almost never gotten laid in the past. Yeah, it's even more frustrating when you're a virgin or perhaps have very limited sexual experience than it is if you've had sexual experience and you're just going through droughts, so to speak.
Yeah, and I don't think the developmental models really take this into account. You know, if Reich is right that the orgasm is how we regulate and co-regulate our nervous systems, and if it's true that we evolved in an environment of sexual abundance, what does that say about our development? How is that going to stunt our development now, where we're in a culture where males, can go for decades without any kind of sexual co-regulation? What's that going to do to someone's development?
Yeah, without other tools, I don't know what it would do. And by other tools, I'm thinking of, because I got kind of into Reich for a while. I was a body worker, and a lot of the body work I did was influenced by a number of founders, but Reich was one of them. And so, I mean, you've done TRE, so I think you have some experience with this, where when you have the ability to release bindings in your body, there is a type of orgasmic response that the nervous system goes into. And I think that is like, that's one way to hack the system, so to speak, to get that regulation. Sure. But most people don't have access to that. And
food as well. I mean, you can regulate the nervous system with food, but of course that is fraught with problems as well. Our country now, we are overnourished.
Over macronourished anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's now, we've been talking for about 2 hours, so.
Well, I think if anybody is on top of your sexual marketplace and the impact on development, it should be David Data. So, David Data, if you're watching this, get on this, man.
But does he study the? I don't know that he studies the sort of collective thing. He's
No,
more
I don't
just
think that he does.
he's
I
an
don't think
upper
that he
left
does.
guy.
Yeah. But that's the kind of person that should be on it, really.
Guess he's not interested in the collective. There are a lot of these like red pill guys, manosphere guys, and they've got some very kind of cynical views or regressive views, but they're the ones that are sort of they've got their finger on the pulse of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I sort of wade into their little communities every now and then I just gotta like get all the muck off me and
yeah,
like, oh, misogyny.
they're useful for like half description, but not prescription.
There you go.
And they do kind of discount. I think some of them, anyway, they do discount. They seem to take on a male centric side of it, which is not helpful. But they are the only people I know of that are talking about what you're talking about. They're the only people I know of that are talking about a return to they're talking about they're only people talking about that there's a lot of men being left out of that environment and what the consequences are of men not being able to partner.
And this is one of those topics you can't really talk about, or you'll be called a misogynist incel or something, or
Yeah, you're misogynist or incel, or you're what's another one that gets thrown at you? You're like yeah, I mean, I think there's, in terms of sexual dynamics, it seems to me we've only like barely gone through like half of green. We really haven't confronted a lot about the assumptions placed on masculinity, like even like the way that feminism confronts masculinity. It's still a lot of like, man up, your vulnerability doesn't matter. You're not a real man if you talk about the vulnerabilities of men kind of attitude.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, they want to progress the traditional feminine role in a way, but
they want to define feminine. They want feminine to become about masculine traits.
Yeah, that's fucked up too. So
and one of those right wing, gender authors I was reading, he defined feminism as male role envy.
That's not bad.
I thought that was an interesting take. So, and then women have historically unprecedented power over mating right now. Because of the pill, because of easy access to abortion, because of the breakdown of traditional marriage, not just that, but the whole slut shaming thing has become more taboo, and they're able to, with like Tinder, they're able to mate anonymously without their community finding out, and historically the community would keep women in check and so on and so forth. So women have unprecedented power over the mating process. But you can't really talk about that. Someone's going to call me some bad name because I just said that.
Well, I think we got a good group, so hopefully nobody in our particular group, but
I'll probably throw this on YouTube, though.
You're not wrong. I mean, to me, the challenge is, I have found with myself and with other men that the hack to it is to really go within yourself and find something unique in yourself. And most women are not going to pick up on it, but there will be women that do. And for them, it's there's no substitute for that. And I guess like part of why I do the work I do with yoga and transformation is like I want more people entering that territory because it allows us to get around the giant mess that you're describing. Because the giant mess you're describing while you're talking about women having unprecedented power in the mating space, it's also not helping women's happiness.
That's right.
Because historically, the mating game has been a co-creation.
There you
go. If they have all the power there, it's not a co-creation anymore.
Yeah, that's why more and more of them are opting out of what they call riding the cock carousel.
Crude, man, crude.
I learned that from a woman, so who says she was done riding the CC. I'm like, what's the CC? So yeah, I was wondering how you got into basic white girl spirituality.
Yeah.
Yoga.
Well, maybe a topic for another time, but I would say
topic for another time.
The fast story is it started giving me access to a lot of things that I hadn't had access to before.
Yeah, and I did I did one of your classes, and it's definitely not a basic white girl approach that you teach, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I got the sense you were plugged into being, and that's what you're teaching, which is what yoga was always supposed to be about. But my history with yoga doesn't really demonstrate that. Americanized anything ends up losing the whole sacred dimension.
I would be fascinated to talk on this subject with you and your experience with that sometime when we have more time, because partly I get what you're saying with that, and then also I kind of have a little bit of me that wants to defend it a little bit, in the sense that I think the whole more what we might call superficial yoga can be helpful because it gets a lot more people into the funnel, so to speak. And if you have a way to help draw them deeper in the funnel, like they come in because it's the hip new workout or whatever, and you can have classes that sort of meet that.
Right.
But there's a way to have classes that meet that while inviting something deeper. Like there's a way to have a type of conveyor belt, as we say.
Right, a conveyor belt. Yeah, you're right. That's perfectly legit. I do the same thing with the Enneagram. People come to learn their type, and then it's a bit of a bait and the switch. Because I'm like, sorry, I'm not going to tell you your type. Here are your top few, and you can explore them. And I want to get people beyond the sort of narcissistic mirroring, oh, this is my type, into actually working with the material, rather than crystallizing a new identity. Oh, I'm a 7. And that's the end of it. So yeah, there does seem to be the case that we sort of need to capitalize on whatever people's superficial, casual motives are, and then create that conveyor belt for people to go more into the depths and this, the sacred. Bait and switch.
I think that would be a great topic for the next discussion, because definitely
let's do it.
A giant part of my work is trying to understand what that conveyor belt looks like, and how to bring people through it so that they may come for one thing and then they land in another place, and then once they land in that place, they begin to land in a deeper place and just keep going.
Yeah, I think we can talk more about that later, but there obviously needs to be some kind of progression. Americans like progression. They like levels, stages that they can climb. And so really you just make it get more and more dive deeper into the sacred as people progress.
Yeah, and the thing is, what I find in yoga is if you don't provide people with that conveyor belt with depth into the sacred, then they will aim for horizontal conveyor belt, like into doing like more athletic shit.
Yeah.
Ultimately, like what serves your life, what serves your well-being and living this one precious good life that you have. And so I think it's a duty for yoga teachers to help draw people deeper.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of them think they are, but they don't necessarily know about the ontological ground. You know, they don't really have a clear sense of what is deeper. So that's a conversation for another day. I just thought of Bikram, which brings in some of the whole sexual stuff.
Well, I mean, that's a case study in what happens when people get sexually frustrated. So
there you go, man. All right, dude. Well, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Marshall.
Yeah. And have a good day.
You too. Good luck with all the endeavors that we talked about earlier.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Ciao for now. Bye.